I absolutely love roguelikes. For those that don't know, a roguelike is a game that features permadeath and procedurally generated levels, where a large majority of the progression comes from the player getting better, as opposed to your character simply becoming stronger. It honestly doesn't even matter what subgenre it is. I've played my fair share of roguelikes ranging from strategy games like Inscription, Into the Breach, and One Step from Eden, to much more action-oriented titles like Dead Cells, Enter the Gungeon, and RoboQuest. But it wasn't until a few months ago that I first tried Risk of Rain, and I think that Risk of Rain 2 has now become one of my favorite roguelikes ever. But before we can get to talking about Risk of Rain 2, we have to talk about the original Risk of Rain, an almost decade-old game. It was a platformer roguelike that actually started out as a college project. While it didn't feature random map generation like most roguelikes, it did feature random placement with regard to enemies, chests, shrines, and the teleporter, which, when activated, would require the player to defeat a boss and survive 90 seconds before stopping enemy spawns and allowing them to move on to the next stage. However, what really made it stand out was its twist. The game got harder the longer you played. Now at first that might seem normal for a game, but I don't mean it got harder because you got to hard stages. No, I mean it gets harder with each passing second. Not only does every enemy gain extra health and damage over time, the types and quantities of each enemy spawn change as well. This works using an AI called the Director. Each second it's awarded a certain number of points, which also increases over time. Every couple of seconds, the Director will then spend these points to spawn a group of enemies. But if it can place 5 of the same type of enemy at once, it instead spawns an elite with more health, damage, and some sort of elemental ability, like dealing fire damage or healing nearby enemies. This created a really unique dynamic, forcing players to balance the time they spent exploring with how fast they needed to move on. But you might be asking, why explore at all? Well, to combat this rising difficulty, you need to find items, bought with the money you earn from killing enemies. The first game had 5 different types of items. Common or gray items are the very basic, simple items that just give you a stat boost, like the soldier's syringe, which boosts attack speed, Paul's goat hoof, which increases movement speed, or the lensmaker's glasses, which increases crit chance. Uncommon or green items are a bit more unique, like the Hopoo feather that gives you a double jump, or the leeching seed, which heals you when you attack. Rare or red items are even more unique and even more powerful, like Dio's best friend, which gives you a free revive. Equipment have activatable effects, like the foreign fruit, which heals you, or the Somrang, which does that. And lastly, they're boss items, which give you a weaker version of a boss's attack. Now, while most of these items may not seem particularly strong on their own, when combined, the right build can get pretty crazy. And luckily enough, you actually have a little bit of control over which items you pick. Most of the time you're going to be opening random chests, of which there are 2 main types: small chests that guarantee a common item, and large chests that guarantee an uncommon item. But there's also shops that let you buy one of 3 items, and roulette chambers that cycle through different items and pop out the one you stop on. You've also got various shrines that can give you different rewards, like the Imp Shrine, which spawns imps you can kill for an item, or the Gambling Shrine, my beloved. Alternatively, if you don't want any more items, you could also spend your money on various drones with unique effects. But back to items. Did I mention they can stack? So, in theory, you could get 10 Lensmaker's glasses and always crit, or as many syringes as possible and attack unbelievably fast. But that's just in theory, right? Nope. There's a way you can handpick your items instead of randomly receiving them, by using the artifact of command. Now, the rarities are selected for you, and you get to pick the item. Speaking of, before you start your run, you can equip various artifacts that allow you to mix up the game when you get bored, like the artifact of honor, which spawns every enemy as an elite, or the artifact of enigma, which gives you an equipment at the start of the game, but randomizes it every time you use it. On top of that, there are 3 different game modes: Drizzle, Rainstorm, and Monsoon, that change the rate at which enemies spawn and how fast the game gets more difficult. But where the game really shines is its diverse cast of characters, each equipped with 4 abilities. Their primary access their basic form of damage, while their secondary is a more situational form of damage, and their utility either provides mobility or protection, with their ultimate rounding out their kit as a high damage special with a longer cooldown. As for the actual characters though, the original Risk of Rain gives us a cast of 12. Commando is your basic default class that feels kinda unremarkable, rocking a set of dual pistols and a dash. Huntress is another pretty basic class, but with a bigger focus on mobility and damaging groups of enemies. Enforcer is a shotgun and a riot shield, making him really good at blasting away in one direction at a time. Bandit plays how you'd expect for a typical Western bandit, and is incredibly combo intensive. Handy at first seems like a pretty typical heavy-hitting brawler, but what makes him unique are the launchable drones he gains whenever he kills something. Engineer is all about building turrets, just like every other engineer ever. Miner's whole kit revolves around this heat bar, which charges up when you hit enemies with your primary, making you scorched when full, and making your other abilities stronger. Sniper is pretty self-explanatory, but he does have one of the coolest passives, where a little bar pops up after he shoots, and if he stops it in this zone, then his next shot gets a damage boost. And he can do a pretty sick backflip. Acrid is one really good boyo who's infected with the worst, most poisonous stomach flu you've ever seen. Mercenary is honestly just a glorified Master Yi, but he's still really fun nonetheless. Loader's basically just Spider-Man, but with a taser. And finally, there's Chef. Just let him cook. He's got a really diverse kit since his ultimate lets him cook food that can give his abilities a different, more powerful effect. As you can probably tell, all these characters were really unique, allowing everyone to find a playstyle that was just right for them. Now, there's one last element I need to touch on before discussing the sequel: looping. For those that just didn't want their god run to end, you could choose to restart from the first stage, keeping the current difficulty modifier and all of your items instead of going straight to the final boss. Overall, the many ways to play and the insanely synergistic item system led the game to do fairly well, warranting itself a sequel. Originally, this sequel was just meant to be a direct upgrade to the original, but one key difference they wanted to add was to make each item appear visually on your character. But they didn't have enough space to work with given the pixel art style of the game. So, like any reasonable developer would do, instead of scrapping the idea, they completely changed the game and made it 3D. And boy, was that the best decision they ever made. The first change you're going to notice is the characters, so let's talk about who's returning from the first game. Acrid. Yep, that's it. Well, okay, not really, but technically, according to the lore, only Acrid is the exact same thing from the first game. Lore-wise, the difference between the new characters and the old ones is that the original characters crashed on the strange planet the game is set on, whereas the new ones are here to investigate what happened. Risk of Rain's lore actually runs surprisingly deep, but I know almost nothing about it, as do most players, so I'm just gonna skip over it. Anyways though, as for the characters effectively returning from Risk of Rain 1, we've got Commando, Huntress, Bandit, Engineer, Mercenary, and Loader. They all play pretty similarly to how they did in the first game, but for some reason, they also kinda half remind me of League of Legends characters now. Anyways though, there's also 4 new characters. MUL-T forfeits his ultimate ability to use 2 primaries and moves at a snail's pace, but is pretty darn tanky. Artificer, aka Aang from Avatar, has amazing burst damage and AoE attacks. Rex revolves around the really unique mechanic of spending extra health to deal extra damage. And lastly, Captain, who, in my opinion, mostly feels like a support character, but like any good captain, can launch a nuke at will. Beyond just the new characters, the ways to play increased exponentially, as every character got 3 unlockable alternate abilities, more artifacts were added, and 8 Eclipse difficulties were created, which were even harder than Monsoon. Additionally, we got 1 new type of item, lunar items, which have to be bought with a completely separate currency saved between runs called lunar coins. They trade 1 resource for another, like the shaped glass, which doubles your damage but halves your health. Some are so hard to work around that they can just be flat out run-ending, while others can be insanely busted. Speaking of trading 1 resource for another, 2 also introduce scrappers and printers. Scrappers allow you to recycle your items for scrap of the same rarity, which can then be used at a printer to forge whatever item the printer's offering if it's the same rarity. But if you don't have any of the correct scrap, then a random item of the same rarity gets transformed into the printer's item instead. I personally don't like them that much because they can really slow down the pace of the game, and from what I've heard, they can be kinda busted. Anyways, on the topic of interactables, Risk of Rain 2 also brings a few new drones to the table, 4 new types of chests which give you equipment, damage items, utility items, or healing items, and, most importantly, new shrines, of which I'll admit that only 3 really matter. The Shrine of Combat is a great way to make money right at the start of the stage, as it instantly spawns strong enemies for you to fight, but the Shrine of Blood lets you make money even faster by trading health for money. Lastly, there's the Shrine of the Mountain, which spawns another boss for you to fight when you activate the teleporter, and I'll just say it now, if you don't use it, you're a total wuss. Actually, speaking of the teleporter, 2 have the requirement that you have to charge it by staying within a certain radius of it, locking all chests outside this radius while charging. It helped balance out the greater movement provided by the 3D environment and the fact that every character could now sprint, but I'll admit, it is pretty annoying to deal with. Another small complaint I have is that the maps, even if they are gorgeous, can get a little repetitive, since there's only 2 per stage and 2 variations of those maps, but the DLC more or less fixes that by adding a new set of really visually distinct maps for every stage. Speaking of, Risk of Rain 2 also got a DLC, Survivors of the Void, which honestly completely changed the game. First off, it added 2 new characters. Railgunner is basically just Sniper, and I really don't understand why they didn't just call them Sniper. There's also Void Fiend, who I'm convinced is just the guy from Grime, but I digress. His whole kit revolves around this Void Meter. It fills up over time and whenever he takes damage. When full, he then transforms into his corrupt form, boosting all his damage by a ton up until his Void Meter is empty again. Aside from the characters, not only did Survivors of the Void add a ton of new items, it also had a completely new type of item. After picking up a Void item, it transforms all of its non-Void counterparts into a significantly more powerful version. Take the Lost Year's lenses for example, which replaces the lens maker's glasses. Now, instead of getting an extra 10% chance to crit, you get an additive 0.5% chance to insta-kill on hit. Survivors of the Void add even more than just the new items and characters, but it's honestly too much to cover since it includes new enemies, bosses, environmental hazards, secrets, and even a whole new game mode. Now I gotta say, so much of the fun of these games comes not only from the combat, but from figuring out which items synergize with which characters. For example, take Bustling Fungus, an item that heals you when you stand still. For almost every character, this item ends up doing absolutely nothing. But for Engineer, whose turrets now inherit all of his items and happen not to move, it's stupidly overpowered. Also, it's just plain awesome getting to the end of a run and seeing everything get basically one shot.
Oh my god, what?
What the What? Wait, what? Huh? Wait, what? Huh? What do you do? Huh? What?
Furthermore, the multiplayer is just phenomenal. Because so many characters are situational, in order to get a good run going, you almost feel like you need to play with friends at times. Plus, it introduces a totally new layer of strategy regarding choosing which items to share with your teammates and which to keep for yourself. Oh, and don't forget the music. I genuinely never put on my own music while playing because Risk of Rain's music is just so good. In fact, I even put it on my personal playlists. Chris Christodoulou, the game's composer, really is just that talented. It's been in the background all video, but I'll shut up for a second so you can really listen to a few of my favorites. Honestly, the only major complaint I have with this game is with the item UI. You see, items don't have a description before you pick them up. This can be pretty annoying when playing multiplayer if, for example, your teammate grabs a Bustling Fungus because they didn't know what it did, but you were playing Engineer and it would have been a godsend. You also can't drop items if you pick them up, so if you make that kind of mistake, it can't be undone. This whole scenario only worsens when using the artificer command, because you don't encounter rare and boss items often enough to know what all of them do or what the best one to pick is. Anyways though, after the huge success of Risk of Rain 2, Hopoo decided to remaster the original, culminating in Risk of Rain Returns. The remaster fixed a lot of the issues people had with the first game, like the glitchy multiplayer, the lack of mouse aiming, the requirement to kill every single enemy in a stage before progressing, and most importantly, the graphics. Yeah, I've been showing you footage of Returns this whole time. You're welcome. Furthermore, it also implemented a lot of the positive changes that 2 made, like alternate abilities, various new items, the new chest types, and some of the new shrines. We also got 3 new characters. Artificer's back from 2, but her whole thing is stun-locking enemies now. Drifter's just your local trash man, collecting scrap from enemies and forging it into new temporary items. And finally, there's Pilot, who's all about grouping and juking, and most importantly, is the only character that can shoot up and down. Oh, did I forget to mention that you could only shoot left and right in the original Risk of Rain? It takes a bit of getting used to, but I honestly think it's a good design choice since it prevents really defensive strategies, like hiding at the top of the map and shooting down at everything. Although, I will say, it does make flying enemies really annoying to deal with at times. Back to Returns though, it also had new variants of each map from the original. There's also a way to disable these new maps, and after playing through the originals, I've gotta say, they're a huge improvement. So many of the original maps just felt like big circles, but now they have a lot more exploration to them. However, despite all that this game did well, I do have a few issues with it. First, Returns just feels like it lacks a lot of depth compared to 2. I don't mean that just because it's 2D. While I do realize this could just be a skill issue, I feel like it's just exponentially harder to dodge when you only have 2 dimensions to move in, and when your jump isn't even 2 tiles high. Additionally, you're kinda just forced to fight almost every enemy you encounter, as your base movement speed is basically the same as theirs. Except, of course, for the enemies that can't jump off of whatever Y level they're on, which feels just as odd. And when you do get into fights late game, like this, you can't even tell what the hell is going on to figure out how to dodge. It's also way hard to find the teleporter. In 2, there's a trick you can use related to particle effects to see it from almost anywhere on the map, but in Returns, there's no equivalent. And the maps are big enough that if you start from the wrong direction, you could lose up to 2 or 3 minutes just backtracking, which can completely screw you over because of the increasing difficulty. Worst of all is that since finding the teleporter is so hard, you almost have to play with the most zoomed out FOV. Not only does this make it hard to appreciate the beautiful pixel art, but it also makes it really hard to see, especially when playing local co-op, since you can't have your face 6 inches from the screen. Speaking of local co-op, while it is fun, having to play shared screen instead of split screen feels really limiting, especially if one person's playing a character with a lot of mobility, like Miner or Loader. I understand that's better for combat, but it really hurts exploration, since you lose the advantage that online co-op brings of being able to find the teleporter way faster. Now, while it may seem like I'm giving the game a lot of hate, I actually do really like playing it, and I think there are a few things it ends up doing better than Risk of Rain 2. I mean, offering a local co-op option at all is great, since it allows me and my friends to all play in person, and it also doesn't require us all to buy the game. Risk of Rain Returns also handles death a lot better, as in 2, when your teammate dies, they're dead until somebody reaches the next stage, but in Returns, they get respawned as a weak little drone, which, to be fair, can't do much, but still gives them something to do in the meantime. I also love the addition of Province Trials, which are these tiny handcrafted challenges that you can complete to unlock alternate abilities and skins for your characters. Not only are they really fun, but they also let you learn how to use these new abilities before you earn them. For comparison, the way you unlock these abilities in 2 was through these really random and obscure challenges you had to complete mid-run. In Returns, there are a few that you still have to unlock this way, and you technically can still unlock all of them this way, but it's a lot easier, faster, and more fun to just complete the Providence Trials. Lastly, I really like the characters exclusive to Returns, like Handy, Chef, Miner, and Pilot. I like Enforcer and Drifter a bit less, but they're still not bad. Honestly, I like all of them a bit more than most of 2's exclusive characters, like MUL-T, Rex, or Captain. Void Fiend's the one exception. Seeing these flaws and successes with Returns, a small part of me wishes that Hopoo just focused on one game instead of trying to produce both. Like, it would've been so cool to be able to fight all the different bosses in Returns in 2, or explore the different environments, or even play Returns' unique characters. But, lucky for me, some of this could become possible in the next few months, as 2 is getting another DLC. Now, you might be wondering why cover this game now if another DLC is in the works. Well, back in November of 2022, Gearbox Publishing bought the Risk of Rain IP. Since then, some people have been really worried about Risk of Rain's future, given that they handled the original port of Risk of Rain 2 to console, which was incredibly glitchy. For now though, people generally seem to be excited by their first project for Risk of Rain 2, Seekers of the Storm. I can't quite say the same though about their mobile gacha game. Hey, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. It would mean a lot to me. And if you want to see more of me, you can either join the Discord link below, or check out my review of PvZ Garden Warfare 2, another great class-based third-person shooter I think you'll love.